Okay, for this next build step, it shows assembly of the tail gearbox in the manual, but it's actually already assembled. All we need to do is just back out the bolts, make sure they're Loctited and put them back in again, and put on the vertical stabilizer or vertical fin. I'm just going to do that, just Loctite it all up and put the fin on, and then we can take a look at that. Okay, and there we go, that's the vertical fin mounted. You can see it's just a couple of screws with some washers to mount that. And the next thing we've got to do is make up the tail pitch slider and connect it to the tail rotor hub. So that's the next job. Okay, I thought I'd just come back to the gearbox because I want to point something out. These two screws here, when you take those out and re-Loctite them and you remount this bracket, you want to make sure that this bracket is absolutely in line with the edge along here. So it's not out of square at all, it needs to be absolutely in square. If you don't get that absolutely in square, then you'll get some binding in the movement of the tail pitch slider on the output shaft here. So make sure this is absolutely square and it's not off, you know, one way or the other. So line it up against this edge here and make sure you get it absolutely spot on. And that way you'll get really nice smooth movement on your tail pitch slider. Okay, so these are the next parts we're working with. We've got our tail rotor hub and grips and pitch slider. And we've also got the control horn mechanism for moving the pitch slider on the tail output shaft, and some screws and things to put it all together, and of course a ball to mount on the end of the control arm here for the tail rotor and servo push rod. So I'll make up this part first and just show you that, and then we'll install this onto the tail pitch slider and you can see what that looks like as well. Oh, also don't forget that these are pre-built parts, so you do need to take these apart, Loctite them and put them back together again. Okay, so here's the completed pre-assembly. All we had to do was put a ball on here, but I did go through and re-Loctite all the screws in this. There wasn't a great deal of Loctite on this particular part, so I definitely recommend doing it. As for the tail rotor, I found that the screws that actually hold the grips onto the hub had quite a bit of Loctite on them and were good, but the Loctite on these other screws was somewhat random. Some had it on, some didn't, but it was generally okay. But you know, checking it yourself rather than having an accident at the field. So the next thing is to actually install the tail pitch slider onto our tail control horn, and it basically goes together like that. So you see that there, it just goes on like that, and then two screws go in from above and below, and that's the installation of it completed. And then we have to mount it onto the tail output shaft. So I'll just put that on there, and then we can put it onto the tail output shaft. Okay, so there we have it installed. And it's now a case of mounting that onto our tail output shaft, which I've got here. And basically the way this works is, I'm going to just zoom out a bit so you can see this. This piece goes in there like that. So the way to do it is to put that onto the tail output shaft first, and then that piece goes in there, and then you can put the screws in from above and below, and that's it mounted, and your tail pitch slider in place. So I'll go ahead and do that and you can have a look at it. Okay, so that's it installed, the screws are in and the pitch slider's now working. I haven't secured the tail rotor yet, and there's a grub screw there, and on the tail rotor output shaft you can just see it there, there's a flat just in here which the grub screw locates onto. Let's move that in shot a bit better, let's get tighter on this so you can see. There we go. So there's the flat there, and the grub screw locates onto that. That holds that in place, and then the tail pitch slider can actually work then, because at the moment it's just pushing the tail rotor off the end of the shaft, but you can see if I put my finger on the end, you can see the idea. So I'll do that grub screw up, and then that item is ready for installation onto the end of the boom, but we've got to prep the boom and torque tube first. Okay, just before we move off of this final build up of the tail rotor, there's one last thing we can do, which is to fit the carbon tail blades supplied in the kit, and these basically will go on like that, and the other one like that. Basically the leading edge should be travelling down towards the vertical fin and then back up towards where the boom would be. So that's the way to mount them, and then provided are some nuts and bolts to hold those in place. Literally just goes in through there like so, and then you put the nut on the back and then just tighten those up so they're just require a little bit of force to move them, but they won't fall under their own weight. Okay, so for this next part we're building up the shaft for the torque tube, and I've got here the two bearings and the rubber carriers for those bearings that go on the shaft drive. These bearings just insert into the centres of these rubber grommets, which I'm not going to be able to do on camera because it's too difficult, but I'll put those bearings in, and then they can be placed onto the shaft drive, and these have to be placed at a specific distance apart, and I'll go through that at the time. Okay, so there we go, just a quick assembly off camera there, and the two bearings are in place, and those need to be inserted onto our shaft, which I've got here. This is the shaft, and those need to be put onto the shaft at a specific distance, and then glued in place. But before we do that, we need to well, these can actually go on at this point. That's not a problem, so they can just thread on like so. So they're on our shaft drive. But what we have got to do is put our shaft drive ends onto the shaft, and those go on like that. And then there's a little packet of 4 screws, you can see here, which secure those onto the end, and then there's one that goes on the other end as well, and gets secured in place with those little button head screws. So I'll put those on, and then we can position these bearings at the correct distances according to the manual. Okay, so there you can see it installed and the button head screws in place, and now we can set the distances for the bearings, and basically the way it works is that they are set at 230 millimeters away. So from here to the edge of the bearing is 230 millimeters, and then the same at the other end, the other bearing is set 230 millimeters away, and then that's it. They just need to be glued in place, which you can do with a bit of CA. Okay, so here we have our finished shaft drive, and you can see 230 millimeters from here to the edge of this one, and then the other side 230 millimeters from here to the edge of that one, and then these have just been cyanoed in place so these can't move. So the next job is to put some oil on these rubber cups and a little bit of oil inside the boom, and slide this down into the boom, ready for installation into the model. Okay, so there we have our shaft out one end of the boom and then out the other end. So that's now ready to have the other various bits and pieces installed onto the boom itself, and then we can insert it into the tail gearbox, and then the whole thing can be installed into the mainframes. So the next job is to get the tail support guides and that kind of stuff on the boom. Okay, so here we have the tail support guides, and these quite literally just insert straight onto the boom. So you see here like so, they just insert onto the boom, and you get all three of those on, and then there is a little guide on the bottom here, and the tail push rod goes through that guide. So if I just bring this on camera, you see like that, and then that supports the push rod on the boom. So we're going to put all three of those on and insert the push rod, and once the push rod is on there, we can actually put the ball links on either end of the push rod. Okay, at this point I ran into a little bit of a problem. These black screws that are used to secure these brackets onto the boom, unfortunately yesterday I broke my high quality driver for this size of screw head, and this is the broken driver. The end broke straight off, and I'm having to use a fairly cheap Allen key in order to screw these in, which I have the offending Allen key here, and unfortunately whilst screwing those in, the head stripped on them, and I've had to replace all three of them with screws from my own source of screws, nuts and bolts. So unfortunately I can't use the kit ones because this Allen key did a great job of stripping them. I'm sure I've used these on the Outrage 550 and they've not been a problem, so I think it's purely down to the fact that I've got a dodgy Allen key here, and I'll need to buy another high quality driver for these. But I'm not a big deal because I've directly replaced them with some other screws that I had to hand, and we can continue with the build. And as you can see, I've now got those brackets on there and the push rod is installed through them. So it's now a case of putting the ball links on the end of the push rod, because I haven't quite done that yet, and then we'll be installing the tail gearbox on the back end here. Okay, so here we have our tail gearbox. There is a single screw which secures that, which goes down through there, which holds that in place, and this quite literally inserts onto the end there, and then we locate it into the gears so that the shaft drive in there is engaged, and then we can tighten up that screw, and our installation of our tail gearbox is complete. So I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so there we go, that's the tail gearbox installed onto the boom. I haven't actually tightened this screw right up at this stage because it's likely we may want to do some alignment of the tail rotor to make sure it's completely vertical once we've installed it into the mainframes. So we've still got a little bit of work to do. Just pulling this around so I can sorry, just manhandling the boom a little bit there, as I wanted to get the push rod down, because that can now clip onto that end ball at the bottom there. And that's not going to go on with hand pressure. I'm going to have to use some pliers to push that on. The ball links are pretty tight, but once they're on they fit quite nice. Okay, quick squeeze with pliers, and that push rod is now in place, and you can see it's working the tail pitch slider. Okay, so that's the boom completed, and we're now in a position to install the tail boom clamp, which I've got here. Let's bring this over. This needs to be installed into the rear of the frames, and then the boom is obviously inserted into here to install the boom onto the helicopter. So that's the next step, and we'll get on with that. I'm going to go ahead and install that into the rear of the main frames, and I'll come back and show you that.